Yevamos Daf Pevav is primarily discussing the sugya of Meiser and who receives it. The Gemara is first going to analyze the machlokas we've seen between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi ben Azariah as to whether a Yisrael is allowed to eat Meiser. We know that it has to be given to a Levi at this stage of the Gemara, but is a Yisrael allowed to eat it, or is it Isser for Yisrael, just like Truma is Asa for Yisrael? The Gemara will give the source of Rabbi Meir's halacha and the Rabbanan's halacha. The Gemara will get into how this fits into our Mishnah. We're trying to explain our Mishnah using this concept. The Gemara will have a question and answer on that. And then Gemara will go to the general topic of who do we give Meiser to Bizman Hazeh. It's not so pashut that it goes only to Levim. Could be it goes to Kohanim as well. And it could be that the Levim actually, although they originally had the right, lost the right to Meiser and now it goes to somebody else. So first of all, we're discussing Mechakos Rabbi Meir and Rabbi ben Azariah. Is a non-Kohen, is Yisrael allowed to eat Meiser or not? So Rabbi Meir, we were Medaik in Mishnah that Rabbi Meir holds that Meiser is Isser. It's also for a non-Levi, that is, for a non-Levi, specifically a Yisrael. Kohanim are allowed. But is it also for Yisrael to eat Meiser? So Rabbi Meir says it's also. So the Gemara says, what's the source of that? So the Gemara says it comes from a pasuk that calls Meiser Truma. It says, Ki es Meiser b'nei Yisrael she'yarim l'Hashem Teruma. It calls Meiser Truma. And that's to link the two. Just like Truma is also for Yisrael to eat, Meiser Rishon is also also for Yisrael to eat. Now, if you link the two, you may also think that it's linked in other ways. It's linked to the extent that there is a Misa B'dei Shemayim if Yisrael eats it, just like there's a Misa B'dei Shemayim if Yisrael eats Truma. You may also think that if Yisrael eats it, he has to pay an extra chomesh when he returns it, like you have to pay for Truma. So those two halachos are not true by Meiser. And though you know that, it's because the pasuk that describes that in Truma is exclusive to Truma. It says, it carries Misa B'dei Shemayim. The Yasef Chamish say alav, and you have to add an extra fifth, but it says alav on it. Only on Truma is that true. That's not true on Meiser. That's a specific halacha to Truma. Now, what are the Rabbanim going to do with the pasuk? The pasuk linked Truma and Meiser. So the Gemara says that linkage is not to tell you the halacha that they are both usher for Yisrael to eat. Really, Yisrael is allowed to eat Meiser. That linkage is to tell you something else. It's to tell you that if you don't take off Meiser, the grain that is not Meisered is usher and carries Misa B'dei Shemayim, just like grain that's not Trumad. The Gemara quotes a brayso that quotes a B'yaisi, who has a different source for that. And this source we have for the same thing. One is to tell you that it's usher, one is to tell you that it carries Misa B'dei Shemayim. What's the other source? And more quotes a brayso. Rabbi Yossi says the pasuk calls your grain Bisharecha. It says, Lo yisuch alecha Bisharecha, Ma'aseh d'gancha v'tireshcha v'yitziracha b'charas b'karcha v'tzinecha v'chol nidarecha asher tidar v'yisecha asuma asyidecha. We cannot eat all these things bisharecha. We cannot eat bisharecha. Now, what's bisharecha? So I have a different pasuk talking about Meiser Ani, and it says, Ki sechal al-aser es kol maser tvuascha b'shan hashlish hashan esem aser v'nasata levi l'gel yosem l'almana v'achlu bisharecha. Then you're allowed to eat it, and that's talking about Meiser Ani explicitly. So Meiser Ani is the most lenient of all the Meisers. So bisharecha, used in that context, is talking about Meiser Ani. So bisharecha here is also talking about Meiser Ani, and it's saying you cannot eat Meiser Ani. You cannot eat the grain if you have not taken the Meiser Ani off. Therefore, you also cannot eat if you haven't taken off the Meiser Rishon and everything else, because that's all Tevel, it's all in the Isser. Now, we have two psukim, therefore. The Gemara has two versions. Which one's foolish? According to one version, this pasuk, this brayso of Bisharecha, is to teach me that it's a lav, you're not allowed to eat it. And the other one, our source that we said, linking Truma and Meiser, is to teach me that it carries Misa, B'dei Shemayim. According to the other source, it's reversed. Our Truma is to tell me that it's a lav, just like that Meiser is a lav, just like Truma, and the pasuk of Rav Yossi is to tell me that it's Misa B'dei Shemayim. The Gemara now returns to its original discussion at the end of the last daf, which brought us into this topic of Rabbi Meir. The Gemara had been analyzing the Mishnah, which said that a Bas Yisrael who's reses, who's engaged to a Levi, doesn't get the right to eat Meiser yet. The Gemara was wondering, a Yisraelis is allowed to eat Meiser, just like everybody else. There's no Isser on Meiser to a Zar, and therefore the Gemara said it's Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir holds that it is also for a Zar to eat Meiser. So the Gemara now is asking, hold a second, if this is Rabbi Meir, that means that this is the opinion that holds that a Kohen is allowed to eat Meiser. It's Rabbi ben Azariah, which we'll see, who holds that a Kohen is not allowed to eat Meiser at all. But a Rabbi Meir holds that they are. So very nice for explaining the first part of the Mishnah that says why a Yisraelis who's ureses to a Levi can't eat Meiser, because she's a Zar, and a Zar is not allowed to eat Meiser, according to Meir, but a Bas Kohen who's ureses to Yisrael should be allowed to eat Meiser. Why do we see that a Bas Kohen who's ureses to Yisrael is not allowed to eat Meiser at all? So the Gemara gives a first explanation to this. The Gemara says we don't really mean to say that she's not allowed to eat Meiser. We mean to say she's not allowed to separate Trumas Meiser. That means to say as follows. You have a Bas Kohen. She's Moreses to a Levi. She has a right to eat Meiser because, like anybody, like any Kohen, or like any Levi, she has a right to eat from the Meiser. There's no Isser there. The thing is, though, she doesn't count as a Levi yet. She's a Bas Kohen. She's only Moreses. And therefore, she cannot take off Trumas Meiser from her Oros's property. The halacha is that an Arusa, a woman who's engaged to a Levi, cannot take off the Trumas Meiser for him. A Levi has to take Truma from his Meiser. It's called Trumas Meiser. His wife, the Nesua, is allowed to take it off for him as well, and then she can eat it. However, his Arusa, if she's just engaged, is not allowed to. So this woman who's a Bas Kohen, even though she's a Bas Kohen, even though she's an Arusa, she's engaged to him, she's not allowed to take off Trumas Meiser from his property. It would be like somebody taking off property, Shaloi Midas, taking off Truma from something he doesn't have the right to. So the Gemara asks, if this is true, that means that you're telling me that it's because she's an Arusa that she's not allowed to take off Trumas Meiser, but in Nesua, if she would be fully married, she would be allowed to take off Trumas Meiser. Is that correct? Gemara says, yes, it is correct. If a brisa that says, that teaches me that a Nesua, who is a Bas Yisrael, has a din of Beischem, you and your house. You both have the same halacha, and a Nesua has a right to take off Truma from her husband's Meiser. She's allowed to take off Trumas Meiser from her husband's Meiser. Says the Gemara, how do you know that's what it means? Maybe it means to say that a Levi's wife has a right to, when she's a Nesua, has a right to eat from his Meiser. So the Gemara says, no. A Bas Yisrael who's married to a Kohen is allowed to eat from Truma. So Bas Yisrael is married to a Levi, which is much more kal than Truma, is for sure allowed to eat from his Meiser. That's not a shayla. Here we're saying that she's allowed to take off his Meiser for him. That makes sense to be what we're learning from here, where it says Atem Uveschem. So again, that's true for Nesua. It doesn't apply for an Arusa, and that's what our Mishnah here means to say. If she's only an Arusa, she's not allowed to take off Trumas Meiser from her husband's Meiser. This is where we have a second approach to the original question. That's brought by Mar Brei de Ravona. He says over here, when we say that you're not allowed to give the woman to eat from the Meiser, where if she's a Bas Kohen, we're not talking about because she's not fully married. The problem is not that. The problem is because she's a woman. And the halacha is that if a woman comes to the granary and she says, hey, I'm a Bas Levi, I'm an Eshes Levi, I'm a Bas Kohen, I'm an Eshes Kohen, we don't give her Truma or Meiser. You don't give it to the lady. You give it only to the husband. So the Gemara now is going to say, well, what's the reason for that? And based on what the reason is whether this makes sense to answer the question or not. So first of all, the Gemara says there's two potential reasons given for that. One reason is because it's yichud. If a woman comes to the granary herself, there's men there around, it'll be an isser yichud. Says the Gemara, if that's the pshat, so then very good, this Mishnah is telling me that this lady, she's only an Arusa, is not allowed to get Truma, she's not allowed to get Meiser from the granary herself. However, according to the other reason, the reason that we're afraid that she's not really an Ashes Kohen, she's not really an Ashes Levi anymore, maybe she got divorced, and we don't know, so therefore we made a rule, never give it to the lady, because you don't know that she's for sure still married to the Levi, to the Kohen or to the Levi. So if that's the pshat, so that doesn't make sense to apply in this case, because if she's a Bas Kohen married to a Levi, so who cares? Even if she is divorced, she's a Bas Kohen now. So she's for sure has a right to take Meiser. So it wouldn't be a valid explanation for why she can't take from the basic granos, in this case that we're referring to over here. Gemara says that's not a kasha, because you're telling me you want to say that a Bas Kohen who's married to a Levi is allowed to get from the granary, because even if she's divorced, she's allowed to take? What do you think would be the halacha if he had a bas kohen married to a kohen? Is she allowed to take from the granary? The Mishnah doesn't say that. The Mishnah doesn't make an exception based on who her father is. The Mishnah says you cannot give a lady just because she's an Ashes kohen. She has to come with her husband, and you have to know that she's still married. So the reason for that must be because even though there's no potential problem, because even if she's divorced, she's a bas kohen. We know some making exceptions, because they're going to make exceptions. People are going to get confused. So we aser the bas kohen who's married to a kohen from coming by herself, just like we'll aser a bas yisrael gzeira, that we shouldn't end up mattering the bas yisrael. And therefore we're going to do it here in this case also. Even though she's a bas kohen married to a levi, we're going to aser her for the same reason. We don't want confusion, and the general rule applies: a lady can't come by herself. We have to know that she's still married. Okay, this will be an explanation. Now the Gemara says this is very good. It solves everything except for one problem. This Mishnah now says that it's an arusa who can't do it. It's not only an arusa. Same is true for an asua, even if she's married. The isser that this Mishnah is describing is because she's a lady. We don't know if she's still married. It's nothing to do with being an arusa. It's even if she's an asua. Why does it say an arusa? So Mishnah says no, it only uses the term arusa because the first half of the Mishnah was talking about arusos. This halacha really applies by nasuos. The first half of the Mishnah was talking about where you have Kohanim and Ashes Yisrael. Kohen wants the Truma, and she can't because she's only an Arusa. That's only true by an Arusa. That's the way we talked about Arusa here. But this din has nothing to do with being an Arusa. This is the din of a lady not being able to take from the granary at all. Okay, this concludes the Gemara's discussion about this Mishnah. Now the Gemara goes to its last sugya, which is to analyze the halacha and the machlokas as to whether Meiser is supposed to be given to a Levi only, or could it be given to a Kohen as well? And there are two stages of this. First of all, when the Torah said give Meiser to a Levi, did it mean Dafka Levi, or could he give it to a Kohen as well? That's one machlokes. And then the other topic is that there was a time which Ezra Sofer made a knas, and he forbade, he said, don't give Meiser to Levi anymore. Levim have lost their rights to Meiser. From now on, you give it either to Aniyim, to poor people, or to Kohanim, who are count as Aniyim if they don't have Meiser, because if they don't have Truma, because they're Tamei. So the Gemara wants to get into these two things. First of all, we'll get into the machlokes as to whether you can give Meiser to a Kohen. That counts as giving the Meiser to where it belongs. And then we'll get into why this knas occurred. The Gemara calls the machlokes. It's Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a Kohen, and he held that Kohanim are allowed to take Meiser. You can be kind of the mitzvah of giving a Meiser by giving to a Kohen. Rabbi Akiva said no, it has to be given to a Levi. What's the machlokes about? The Gemara quotes the pasuk when the Torah describes the mitzvah of Meiser. It says, "Ve'el ha-levim tidaber v'yamar t'leim." You should talk to the Levim. Says Rabbi Akiva is clearly talking to Levim, not Kohanim. Rabbi ben Azariah says no. Kohanim are sometimes called Levim. There are 24 places in the Torah where Kohanim are called Levim. Rabbi Shua ben Levi says so explicitly. We have a pasuk in Yecheskel where it's clearly that way. It says, "V'hakohanim ha-levim b'nei tzadok." Tzadok's children were definitely Kohanim, and it calls them ha-kohanim ha-levim. So you see, Levim sometimes called Kohanim, Kohanim sometimes called Levim, and here when it says talk to the Levim, it means the Kohanim and the Levim. So Rabbi Akiva says here it can't be talking about Kohanim, it has to be talking about Levim, because it says V'chaltam ma'aseh b'chol makom, you can eat it in any place, and it has to be talking about someone and something that can be eaten in any place. Kohanim cannot eat it in any place. Kohanim can't eat it in a cemetery. Kohanim are not allowed to go into a cemetery. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah responds, he says no, it means that in any place that they could go, they're allowed to eat it. It just means to say that they don't have to eat it inside the walls of Yerushalayim like Truma or like Meiser Sheni. It can be eaten anywhere, and there's no exclusions to that. Also, it doesn't have to be eaten Tahara, it can be eaten Tamas Gofi. They don't get Malchus for that. But doesn't mean any place on the planet it can be eaten. There are definitely certain places where people are not supposed to go. Another Gemara quotes an incident, and the Gemara is going to ask a kasha on it. So the incident is that there was a garden, that the owner of the garden used to give his Meiser to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And again, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a Kohen, and he took the Meiser. And Rabbi Akiva felt that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is not supposed to take it. So he changed the garden, he changed the doorway, the entrance of the garden, that it went through a cemetery. You had to pass through a cemetery to get to the garden. Now, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah used to go to the door to get the Meiser. Now he couldn't anymore because he was a Kohen. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah commented cryptically, he said, Akiva with his knapsack, and I'm still alive. So the Gemara understands this to mean that Akiva was a shepherd, and Akiva was therefore poor. So it sounds like he's saying something disparaging about Rabbi Akiva. We'll soon see that he was saying something else. And he was saying, I'm still alive, meaning I'm still here, and I still have my rights. Either he was saying I'm still going to survive, or he was saying that something else, as we shall see further on. Now, in order to ask a kasha on this, the Gemara is going to go to the second sugya, and that's the sugya of the knas. So the Gemara says, why was there knas? Why did they say that Leviim don't have exclusive rights to the Meiser, even according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that Leviim are the only ones who in Torah get Meiser? Ezra HaSofer, who was a grandparent, he was a Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was a direct descendant of Ezra HaSofer. They were both Kohanim. Ezra HaSofer took the rights, the exclusive rights to Truma away from Leviim, the exclusive rights to Meiser, that is, away from Leviim, and said Kohanim can get that also. That's even according to Rabbi Akiva. So the Gemara goes into that. Why did that knas happen? So the Gemara says, why did it happen? The Gemara says, Machokas between Rabbi Yonis and Savia. One says because when they came back, when Klal Yisrael came back to Eretz Yisrael in the days of Ezra HaSofer, the Leviim did not come. And the other one says that the reason is because Kohanim, when they don't have rights to Truma because they are Tameim, they have nothing to eat. And therefore they gave them the rights to get the Meiser. So the Gemara says, why is that a reason for Leviim to lose it? Because Kohanim have a problem, Leviim should lose. So the Gemara says, no. They really made a knas on the Leviim. Everybody agrees because they didn't come back to Eretz Yisrael in times of Ezra HaSofer. The question is, what did they do with it? According to the first opinion, they gave it to the poor people and said the poor people can rely on this. According to the second opinion, they said Kohanim can eat it also because Kohanim count as poor people. Because when they don't have Truma, when they can't eat Truma, they have nothing to eat. And when they're Tameim, which happens often, they cannot eat Truma. Therefore, we consider them to be amongst the poor people. Now, the Gemara says, based on this, we have a kasha on the story that we had before. If the knas was given to the aniyim, so I understand why Rabbi Akiva turned the garden, the entrance, away from Kohanim, because he said Kohanim don't have a right to eat this. Meiser was never given to Kohanim, and even at the time of the Knas, it goes to the poor people. So Kohanim, you don't belong here. But according to the second opinion, that it was given to Kohanim, so even if Rabbi Akiva holds, like his own opinion, that Meiser Midaraisa goes only to Leviim and not Kohanim, but once the Knas happened, it's given to Kohanim as well. So how could Rabbi Akiva turn the garden away? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah has rights to take it because of the Knas. So the Gemara says that he was saying as follows. He's saying, I don't know why you're taking this. If you're coming because of Knas, then you have a right to take it. If you're coming because you think that this is something that belongs to you, Midaraisa, because of the din, then you don't have a right to take this. Now the Marsha here adds, Pshat is that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was wealthy, and he had plenty of money of his own, as is clear in Shas. So Rabbi Akiva was saying, it's because of Knas, you don't have a right to Knas. You're not poor. The only reason Kohanim have a right to Knas is because they have nothing to eat. You don't have a right to Knas. And to that, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah responded, Akiva with his backpack, because Akiva was a shepherd and he was poor. So Akiva is coming to claim for the poor people because of the shepherd, but I am alive. I am a descendant of Ezra HaSofer. I still have my yichus, and therefore I have a right to take this because I hold that it was given to me midaraisa, like Ezra, because I'm descended from Ezra HaSofer, and I am a kain yuchis, and I'm still here, and therefore I have the rights, not just because of the knas, and not just because it was given to the poor people. Now, the Gemara says, what is the source that they didn't come back in the times of Ezra HaSofer? The Gemara quotes the pasuk in Ezra, "V'kavtzei malanar haba el ahava v'anach nesham yem shloisha v'avina ba'am." I looked at the nation of Kohanim u'bnei Levi le'masas yisham. There was no Leviim there when it came back. There were no actual Leviim there. Okay, now the Gemara comments. Rav Chisda says in the beginning, the only shoitrim, the only police, the only ones who were in the charge were Leviim. Like it says, v'shoitrim ha'Leviim lefnechem. Now shoitrim are all from Yisrael. Like it says, v'shoitrim harabim b'roshechem. There are many people more than just Leviim. The Mesilas Yesharim notes that this pasuk v'shoitrim harabim b'roshechem doesn't exist. This does not. It's not an actual pasuk. Does not have a source in the Tanakh anywhere.